I smell something suspicious coming from this vehicle. Step out of the car. Officer Wilson's voice was a stern, uncompromising command. In the driver's seat, Zora remained eerily calm. Her eyes, honed by years in combat zones across the globe, calculated every detail of her surroundings. It was the same tactical awareness that had kept her alive when the stakes were far higher than a traffic stop. "Officer," she replied, her own voice steady, "with all due respect, I don't consent to a search of my vehicle." A snarl twisted Wilson's lips. "You people always think you're above the law." His hand gestured sharply. "Get out of the vehicle. Now." Zora didn't move an inch. Wilson's posture stiffened, his authority challenged. "Why are you making this difficult? Do you want me to make your life difficult? Because I love making people's lives difficult." His hand drifted down, coming to rest on the butt of his holstered pistol. "Especially people who don't know their place." Wilson was certain he was in control. He believed his badge gave him the power to overshadow this woman, just as it had with so many others. He had no idea who he was messing with. He couldn't comprehend that Zora Daniels wielded a power he could never hope to achieve. It had all started an hour earlier. Commander Zora Daniels navigated her silver sedan through streets she hadn't seen in 5 years. At 35, she carried herself with the unmistakable precision of military discipline, back straight, eyes constantly scanning, movements efficient and purposeful. Few in her hometown of Millfield knew that the quiet girl who left after high school now commanded one of the most elite SEAL teams in the Navy. To them, she was just another visitor passing through. Her hands rested at a perfect 10-2 on the steering wheel. Old habits die hard when you've been trained to maintain control in chaos. On the dashboard, a photo showed Zora in her dress uniform receiving a commendation, a life worlds away from these quiet streets. Millfield hadn't changed much. There was the courthouse where her grandfather once worked as a janitor, the police station where she'd been taught to always speak respectfully to officers, the community center where her mother taught piano until the funding was cut. What had changed was invisible to most, a growing divide between who got protected and who got suspected. New businesses flourished on the north side while the south side struggled. New faces were welcome, depending on what they looked like. Zora noticed Officer Blake Wilson's patrol car long before he flipped on his lights. His sudden interest wasn't surprising. She was here to visit her aunt, on 3 weeks of hard-earned leave after months deployed on a classified operation overseas. The flashing lights came on. No siren, just the silent, strobing colors. Zora signaled and pulled over flawlessly, already reaching for her license and registration. By the book. Always by the book. Officer Wilson approached, his hand resting on his holster, an unnecessarily aggressive posture for a routine stop. "License and registration," he demanded, foregoing the courtesy of explaining the violation. "May I ask what I was stopped for, officer?" Zora's voice was respectful, but firm. "You rolled through that stop sign back there," Wilson said, a lie she immediately recognized. She had come to a complete stop, mentally counting the regulation 3 seconds before proceeding. She handed over her documents without argument. Military strategy had taught her to choose her battles. Wilson studied her license, his suspicion growing. "You're not from around here anymore." "Just visiting family, sir. I'm on leave." His eyes narrowed as he shined a flashlight through her windows, the beam sweeping across the immaculate interior. "Nothing to find, nothing to hide." "There is no contraband in my vehicle, Officer Wilson," Zora stated calmly, having noted his nameplate. "I know my rights." Wilson stepped closer, his voice dropping. "Your kind always think you know your rights, think you're so smart." He glanced around before continuing. "But out here, I decide who has rights. I decide who goes home and who goes to jail." Anger flashed in his eyes, fury at being challenged by someone who wasn't intimidated. "Exit the vehicle, now." Zora complied with practiced precision, her movements deliberate, her hands always visible. It was the same protocol she followed in hostile territories. Never give anyone a reason to perceive a threat. "Turn around, hands on the vehicle," Wilson ordered, his voice rising as a second patrol car approached. He leaned in, his voice a venomous whisper only she could hear. "I've dealt with plenty of uppity ones like you. By the time I'm done, you'll wish you'd shown some respect." She complied, her stance balanced, her breathing controlled. As Wilson approached, he deliberately bumped into her, then staggered back dramatically, clutching his face. "She hit me!" he shouted to his approaching colleague. "Officer down! I need backup!" Zora hadn't moved. Her hands remained flat on the hood of her car, visible to her dashboard camera and to the other officer. "I did not touch you, Officer Wilson," she stated, her voice clear and loud enough for any recording device to capture. "Shut up," Wilson snarled, pressing her roughly against the car. "You're under arrest for assaulting an officer." As the cold metal of the handcuffs tightened around her wrists, Zora's mind wasn't on injustice or anger. It was calculating, observing, planning. The Millfield police station hadn't changed. Same faded blue walls, same flickering fluorescent lights. But now she was seeing it from the other side of the law. Most people in her position would be panicking. Commander Daniels was not most people. Her eyes methodically scanned the room, cataloging exits, cameras, and personnel. 3 officers, 2 booking stations, 1 camera with a blind spot near the water cooler, a tactical assessment of enemy territory. Wilson strutted in, shoving Zora forward. "Got a live one here. Assaulted an officer during a routine stop." Sergeant Miller looked up from his desk, his expression shifting from boredom to vague discomfort as he took in Zora's composed demeanor. "She hit you?" Miller asked, an eyebrow raised. "Doesn't look the type." "They never do," Wilson shot back, his bravado echoing. "Caught her with drugs, too. Traffic stop turned violent. Had to use considerable restraint." Zora remained silent. Her SEAL training kicked in. Memories of Hell Week, of standing for hours in the freezing Pacific surf, while instructors screamed, trying to break her. "This," she remembered her instructor yelling, "is just discomfort, and discomfort is temporary." "She came at me with some kind of fighting move," Wilson claimed, demonstrating an exaggerated karate chop that would have been comical if the stakes weren't so high. Officer Diaz, barely 25 and new to the force, glanced between Wilson and Zora, his uncertainty growing. He saw what the others missed. Zora's hands showed no signs of a struggle, no redness, no swelling. Wilson disappeared, returning 30 minutes later with a triumphant smirk and a small baggie containing a few pills. "Look what I found hidden in her vehicle." He dropped it on the booking desk. Zora's eyes narrowed imperceptibly. Her car was meticulously maintained. Those pills weren't hers. "Illegal prescription drugs," Wilson announced. "Explains the erratic behavior." Miller frowned. "You searched the vehicle after the assault?" "Had probable cause," Wilson replied, a little too quickly. "Smelled something suspicious." As Zora was photographed and fingerprinted, Diaz noted the mechanical precision in her movements, her perfect military posture even in handcuffs. When she was granted her phone call, he listened from a distance. Most people called family or a lawyer. Zora called a number she knew by heart. "Lieutenant Commander Daniels reporting delay in scheduled check-in," she said, her language clipped and precise. "Location, Millfield Municipal Station. Situation Charlie." The desk officer assumed it was a strange conversation with a relative. Only Diaz recognized the coded, military cadence. 2 hours later, Jeremy Wells, the overworked public defender, sat across from her. His tie was stained, his eyes bloodshot. "Look, Ms. Daniels," he sighed, barely skimming her file. "Assaulting an officer is serious. Add the drug possession. The DA is offering a deal. Plead guilty to resisting arrest. They'll drop the other charges. 6 months probation." "I didn't assault anyone," Zora stated calmly. "And those drugs were planted." Wells had heard it all before. "It's your word against an officer's. Who do you think a jury in this town will believe?" "No," Zora replied without hesitation. "I will not plead guilty to something I didn't do." Wells left, frustrated. Zora, alone again, began mentally mapping the case, identifying every inconsistency, every procedural flaw. This was no longer just about defending herself. It was about dismantling a system that Wilson had clearly manipulated before. Across town, Wilson was feeding his story to Assistant District Attorney Karen Larson, painting a picture of a dangerous woman who attacked him without provocation. Larson nodded, taking notes, another cog in a well-oiled machine. But machines can break. At exactly 19:30 hours, the station phone rang. Sergeant Miller answered. His expression shifted from boredom to confusion, then to deep concern. "Yes, sir, I understand, sir. No, I wasn't aware of her status." He glanced toward the holding cells. Yes, sir. I'll personally look into it immediately. Miller hung up, staring at the phone as if it might strike him. Diaz, he called out, his voice strained. Who authorized the arrest of Zora Daniels? Wilson, sir, said she assaulted him. Miller rubbed his face, a deep weariness settling over him. Well, we might have a problem. That was Naval Special Warfare Command asking why one of their officers missed a scheduled check-in. Diaz's eyes widened. She's military? Not just military, Miller muttered, the pieces clicking into place. Something a lot more complicated. The machine had started to sputter. The first domino had fallen. In Courtroom 3, the preliminary hearing for the state versus Zora Daniels began. Judge Harmon, a 30-year veteran of the bench, presided with practiced efficiency. Officer Wilson took the stand, his uniform crisp, his demeanor solemn. He touched his face, where carefully applied makeup enhanced a faint redness. I pulled over the defendant for running a stop sign, he began, his voice hitting the practiced notes of righteous indignation. When I asked her to exit the vehicle, she became aggressive. She lunged at me with what I can only describe as some kind of military fighting technique. He offered the court a ridiculous pantomime. During the subsequent search, we discovered prescription medication not in her name. Zora watched from the defendant's table, her focus absolute. She tracked the subtle interactions, the bailiff's position, the judge's micro-expressions as Wilson's story grew more elaborate. Her public defender's cross-examination was perfunctory at best. When it was Zora's turn to enter her plea, something shifted. Her posture straightened. Her voice, when she spoke, carried the quiet authority of command. Not guilty, Your Honor. The two words, delivered with unwavering certainty, altered the energy in the room. Judge Harmon studied her with renewed interest. Ms. Daniels, the state requests bail be set at $50,000. Do you have anything to say? Before her lawyer could intervene, Zora addressed the court. Your Honor, I am not a flight risk. I have served my country honorably for 12 years. I have no criminal record. The charges against me are fabricated. Judge Harmon's gaze remained fixed on her. What branch of the military, Ms. Daniels? The Navy, Your Honor. Current rank? Lieutenant Commander, Your Honor. A murmur went through the courtroom. Wilson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. And your current assignment? The judge asked. I'm not at liberty to discuss the specifics of my assignment in open court, Your Honor, but my commanding officer can verify my status. The first card had been played. Judge Harmon nodded slowly. The game had changed. Bail is set at $5,000. Next case. In the courthouse hallway, after posting bail, Zora made two calls. The first, to her aunt, was brief and reassuring. The second was to a number that doesn't appear in any public directory. Just then, Wilson made his fatal error. He approached her as she waited outside, crowding her space. You think you're clever, don't you? Dropping your military service like it means something. This isn't over. Zora's response was measured, her voice calm. Officer Wilson, it would be in your best interest to step back. Or what? He sneered. You'll attack me again. Nobody's gonna believe you over me. You're just another perp with a fancy story. I haven't attacked anyone, Officer Wilson, she said, her hand moving casually to her lapel. But I do believe in preparation. Wilson didn't see the tiny recording device capturing his every word. By the time I'm done with you, he hissed, you'll be lucky if you're just dishonorably discharged. I know people in this town. I know judges. I know prosecutors. This is my territory. Each threat, each smug admission of corruption was captured perfectly for future use. One more thing, Wilson added with a sneer. You might want to check on that fancy car of yours. Impound lots can be so careless. Things go missing, get damaged, a real shame. As he walked away, basking in the glow of his own intimidation, Zora allowed herself the faintest of smiles. In tactical warfare, there is a core principle. You must sometimes allow the enemy to advance into a vulnerable position before you strike. Officer Blake Wilson had just marched himself directly into her trap. Have you ever encountered someone who completely, fatally underestimated you? How did you handle it? Share your experience in the comments and hit that subscribe button, because what's coming next in Commander Daniels' strategy isn't just revenge, it's justice, served cold. Within hours of Zora's release, the walls of her motel room had transformed into the unmistakable nerve center of a military intelligence briefing. Case files, timelines, and connections were mapped with surgical precision. Each element was meticulously arranged with the exactitude that comes from years of planning high-risk operations, where the smallest details determine who lives and who dies. 6 years earlier, during advanced SEAL intelligence training, Zora had excelled at this very work. While other trainees focused on direct action, she demonstrated an uncanny ability to piece together disparate fragments of information into actionable intelligence. Now, those same skills were focused like a laser on one man, Officer Blake Wilson. His arrest record, his testimony in previous cases, his financial transactions. A picture began to emerge, not of an overzealous cop, but of something far more sinister. The pattern was unmistakable once you knew what to look for. 17 arrests in the past year bore remarkable similarities. Predominantly minority suspects, routine traffic stops that escalated to searches, drugs conveniently discovered, and charges that were ultimately dropped in exchange for guilty pleas to lesser offenses. The statistics told a story most would miss. But Zora wasn't most people. A knock at the door interrupted her analysis. 3 quick taps, exactly as arranged. Officer Diaz stood outside, still in uniform but clearly off-duty, his nervousness a palpable tension in his posture. "I shouldn't be here," he said, his eyes darting over his shoulder as he stepped inside. "And yet, here you are," Zora replied calmly, gesturing to a chair, "because something doesn't feel right." Diaz took in the organized chaos on the walls, his eyes widening. You're really military, aren't you? Wilson said you made that up." "Lieutenant Commander, Naval Special Warfare," she stated flatly. "Look, Diaz, Wilson's arrest reports, they follow a script. Always the same language, always the same kind of charges." Diaz hesitated. Then the dam broke. "Last month," he began, his voice low, "I saw him planting evidence in a suspect's car. When I asked about it, Sergeant Miller pulled me aside, told me to forget what I saw if I wanted to keep my job." The final piece clicked into place. Miller's discomfort at the station wasn't uncertainty. It was complicity. Diaz slid a USB drive across the table. Departmental records, arrest histories, body cam footage that never made it into evidence. I made copies before they could be misplaced. The data confirmed what Zora had suspected but couldn't yet prove. Wilson's history of fabricated charges wasn't random. It was targeted, calculated, and profitable. In the quiet of the night, as she cross-referenced financial records, the connection flared to life. Deposits to offshore accounts followed certain arrests. A pattern of suspects who worked for a rival drug operation were targeted while others walked free. The pills planted in her car were the same prescription medication seized in a raid 3 months earlier, a seizure that was never properly logged into evidence. Wilson wasn't just a bigoted cop abusing his power. He was on someone's payroll. After hours of digging, the trail led to one Marcus Reynolds, owner of 3 nightclubs on the north side and rumored narcotics supplier for half the county. The same Marcus Reynolds who contributed generously to the police benevolent fund. The same Marcus Reynolds whose competitors kept finding themselves in the back of Officer Wilson's patrol car. More disturbing were the files of those who tried to fight back. Tamika Johnson, who filed a complaint against Wilson 3 years ago, suddenly found herself facing additional charges until she withdrew her statement. James Martinez, who had video evidence contradicting Wilson's testimony, had that footage mysteriously disappear when his house was burglarized days before his trial. The pattern of intimidation and corruption extended beyond Wilson, weaving its way into the department itself. Sergeant Miller's signature appeared on dozens of questionable evidence logs, each one bearing the procedural violations that would have exposed the entire scheme. As dawn broke, Zora placed one final photo on her board, Sergeant Miller meeting with Reynolds behind a closed restaurant. The image was captured by a local blogger who thought he was documenting an innocent meeting but was actually photographing the gears of corruption turning. At the station, Wilson sat at his desk, scrolling through personnel databases. The name Zora Daniels finally returned a hit, a basic military service record. Navy, as she'd claimed, but with nothing indicating special operations, nothing to suggest she was anything more than a glorified secretary. "Administrative specialist," he snorted, showing the screen to a fellow officer. Pencil pusher trying to act tough. What he didn't realize What the system was designed to prevent him from ever realizing was that Zora's true service record was classified, buried behind security clearances he couldn't even imagine. The sanitized version he was looking at was a deliberate fiction, designed to conceal her actual role and lethal capabilities. Wilson leaned back in his chair, his confidence restored. She was just another defendant to break, just another case to manipulate. But unknown to him, the trap was set, the evidence compiled, the counter-assault mapped out with military precision. Commander Zora Daniels wasn't fighting for herself anymore. She was fighting for Tamika Johnson, for James Martinez, for every person Wilson had victimized. And when Navy SEALs fight, they don't fight to participate. They fight to win. The black SUV with government plates arrived at the Millfield Inn without fanfare. Its sole occupant, Captain Richard Hargrove, stepped out in a tailored civilian suit. Zora opened her door, her caution giving way to the faintest of smiles. "Didn't expect to see you in person, Captain." "When one of my best officers gets arrested on bogus charges," he said, stepping inside, "I make exceptions to protocol." For the first time since her arrest, Zora's military bearing softened. The presence of her commanding officer, the man who had selected her for SEAL training when many doubted a woman could complete the program, was a profound validation. Hargrove surveyed the investigation board with professional appreciation. "I see your intelligence-gathering skills haven't dulled in peacetime." "This isn't exactly peace, sir," Hargrove nodded, placing a classified folder on the desk. "Your message triggered some inquiries. Turns out, Officer Wilson has pinged on federal radar before." The folder contained what Zora was missing, the official documentation that transformed suspicion into cold, hard fact. Wilson's bank records showed unexplained deposits corresponding with key arrests. Internal affairs complaints had been buried by sympathetic superiors. His connections to drug operations crossed state lines, bringing him squarely into federal jurisdiction. "There's someone else you should meet," Hargrove said, checking his watch. Right on cue, a sharp knock at the door. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen entered, the JAG Corps insignia gleaming on her impeccable uniform. "Commander Daniels," Chen nodded professionally, "I've reviewed your case. It's a textbook frame-up, but they made mistakes. Multiple procedural violations, chain of custody issues, inconsistencies in Officer Wilson's sworn testimony." Over the next hour, a military operation took shape, not with weapons, but with legal strategy and chains of evidence. Chen outlined jurisdictional authorities, procedural requirements, and the precise legal framework that would dismantle Wilson's corruption. "We don't just want a dismissal," Zora explained, pointing to her board. "Wilson is part of a larger network. These victims deserve justice." Chen's strategy was surgical. "We'll use the preliminary hearing to spring the trap. Once Wilson commits to his false testimony under oath, we introduce the contradictory evidence, force him to either admit his lies or commit perjury on a federal level." "What about Sergeant Miller?" Hargrove asked, studying the connection charts. "Secondary target," Zora answered, "but essential to proving the systemic nature of the corruption." As the sun set, the plan crystallized. It wasn't a defense strategy, it was a counteroffensive. Chen would replace Zora's public defender. Hargrove would ensure federal authorities were standing by. "Wilson won't go down without a fight," Chen warned. "Men like him rarely do." "I'm counting on it," Zora replied, her calm confidence a stark contrast to the storm they were about to unleash. Across town, that very man paced his living room, a glass of whiskey in hand, his cool facade finally cracking. Something felt wrong about this case. Despite the sanitized military record he'd found, Wilson couldn't shake the feeling that Zora Daniels was different. His phone buzzed. A text from Sergeant Miller. "Hearing tomorrow. Stick to the script. This goes away like all the others." But would it? The doubt gnawed at him, unfamiliar and unwelcome. His methods, intimidation, fabricated evidence, procedural shortcuts, had always worked. Yet something about Daniel's composure, the way she observed everything without fear, triggered an instinct he had long ignored. As midnight approached, Wilson made his fateful decision. If there was something more to find on Zora Daniels, he would find it himself. The motel parking lot was nearly empty as his unmarked car pulled in. Room 214 was dark. His police training took over as he approached the door, tools ready to make quick work of the lock. What he couldn't see were the custom motion sensors Zora had installed hours earlier. What he didn't know was that military-grade cameras were now recording his every move. The lock yielded. The door swung open silently. Wilson stepped inside, his flashlight beam cutting through the darkness. Empty. Not just vacant, completely sanitized. The investigation board, the files, every trace that Zora Daniels had ever been there was gone. All that remained was a single red light, blinking on a device mounted near the ceiling. "Looking for something, Officer Wilson?" The voice came from a speaker on the device. Zora's voice, calm, controlled, and expectant. The color drained from Wilson's face as he realized his fatal error. The trap wasn't for the courtroom tomorrow. The trap was here, and he had just walked right into it. Behind him, flashing lights flooded the parking lot. Not local police. Federal agents positioned exactly where Zora had calculated they would have optimal lines of sight. In warfare, the perfect ambush isn't just about the attack. It's about knowing your enemy so well you can lead them exactly where you want them to go. Wilson stood frozen as the magnitude of his miscalculation crashed down upon him. He hadn't been hunting Zora Daniels. She had been hunting him. The Millfield County Courthouse had stood for over a century, but the tempest brewing within its walls today was unlike any it had ever faced. Assistant District Attorney Karen Larson stared at the conflicting files on her desk. On one side was Officer Wilson's familiar formulaic arrest report. On the other, a sealed envelope containing dashcam footage that directly contradicted his sworn statement, along with service records showing the defendant wasn't just military, she was decorated special forces. "This can't be right," she murmured, her call to Wilson going straight to voicemail. She didn't know he was currently being questioned about an unauthorized entry into a motel room, his badge temporarily suspended. Down the hall, Judge Raymond Harmon's expression darkened with each document he reviewed. 30 years on the bench had given him an instinct for cases that stank, and this one was reeking. The evidence before him included Wilson's own body cam footage, with suspicious gaps that coincided precisely with the alleged assault and discovery of the drugs. More troubling were the statistical analyses showing an undeniable pattern in Wilson's arrests that defied all probability. "Your Honor," his clerk interrupted, "a Lieutenant Commander Chen from the Judge Advocate General's Corps is requesting to be recognized as counsel for the defendant." The judge raised an eyebrow. The JAG Corps didn't get involved in local cases unless something exceptional was at play. Across town, Wilson's partner, Trevor Reynolds, sat in his patrol car, phone pressed to his ear. "Look, Blake, I can't just make up testimony," he protested. "The body cam doesn't show what you're saying happened." Wilson's voice was strained, desperate. "Just say your angle was bad. Say you saw her make an aggressive move." "This is perjury, Blake. I could lose my badge. We could lose a lot more than that." The desperation in Wilson's voice was new, the sound of a man watching his world crumble. Meanwhile, in a federal conference room, Zora met with Officer Diaz and two other former defendants of Wilson's, men who were too intimidated to come forward until now. "You'll be protected," Zora assured them, her calm authority a shield. "Federal witness protection, if necessary." This wasn't just about winning her case. It was about dismantling a system. Each witness statement, each piece of evidence, was a weapon being readied for battle. As twilight settled, Zora stood at the window of her new, secure location, looking out at the town where she grew up. 25 years ago, a 10-year-old Zora had stood outside this very courthouse, holding her father's hand as he tried to file a complaint against officers who had ransacked their home in a mistaken drug raid. They found no drugs, but the family's savings, cash kept at home because of her father's deep distrust of banks, was confiscated as suspected drug money. "They won't even look at us," her proud, strong father had said, his voice broken by a system designed to break him. It wasn't just justice driving Zora now. It was the memory of that day. It was the knowledge that Marcus Reynolds, the man Wilson protected, had his eyes on redeveloping the very neighborhood where the community center that had saved Zora as a child now struggled to survive. Wilson and his allies weren't just targeting individuals, they were systematically strangling her community. Later, as Zora returned to her room, a security officer handed her an envelope. No return address. Inside, a single photograph of her aunt's house with a red X drawn across it. A typed note read, drop the case or they suffer next. The threat was amateur, desperate, the work of a man watching his world collapse. Wilson's panic was showing, but he had just made the worst possible mistake a man could make. He had threatened the family of a Navy SEAL. The photograph didn't frighten Zora. It focused her. It transformed her methodical pursuit of justice into a deeply personal mission. Wilson had just guaranteed that Commander Zora Daniels would not stop until justice was complete, total, and absolute. The next morning, the courtroom fell silent as the bailiff called the case. The state of Ohio versus Zora Daniels. The atmosphere crackled with tension, the air thick with unspoken anticipation. Judge Harmon surveyed the room. The gallery was unusually full, populated by stern men and women with an unmistakable military bearing. Captain Hargrove sat directly behind the defense table, his presence a silent declaration. Officer Wilson took the stand with practiced confidence, but the strain showed in the tightness around his eyes and the restless tapping of his fingers against his thigh. He had sweated through his crisp uniform despite the courtroom's cool air. "Officer Wilson," the prosecutor began, "please describe for the court the events leading to the defendant's arrest." Wilson launched into his rehearsed story. The traffic stop, the suspect's aggression, the sudden attack, the discovery of the drugs. "She came at me without warning," Wilson testified, gesturing to the carefully applied makeup simulating a bruise on his cheek. "Used some kind of military fighting technique. Had it not been for my defensive training," Officer Wilson stated for the record, "my injuries could have been far more severe." Zora's public defender, Jeremy Wells, rose for the cross-examination. He moved with the weary resignation of a man going through the motions, a familiar and often futile performance. But this time, the script was about to change. "Your Honor," Wells announced, his voice suddenly clear and firm. "At this time, the defense would like to introduce Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen of the Judge Advocate General's Corps. She will be taking over as counsel for Commander Daniels." A ripple of surprise moved through the courtroom. Officer Wilson's face flickered with uncertainty as a woman with an impeccable military bearing approached the bench, credentials in hand. "Your Honor," Chen stated, her voice calm and authoritative, "the United States Navy has a vested interest in these proceedings, as they involve a decorated officer facing charges that could impact matters of national security." Judge Harmon reviewed her credentials, his expression unreadable, before nodding slowly. "The court recognizes Lieutenant Commander Chen as counsel for the defendant." The shift in energy was palpable. This was no longer a routine case of a civilian against local law enforcement. This had become something else entirely. Throughout it all, Zora remained composed at the defense table. Her posture was perfect, her gaze steady. Unlike most defendants who shrink under the weight of the proceedings, she sat with the quiet confidence of someone who had faced far worse than a courtroom. Chen's approach to cross-examination was nothing like the one Wells would have employed. It was surgical, precise, and devastatingly prepared. "Officer Wilson," she began, "you testified that my client struck you in the face, resulting in the injuries you are displaying today. Is that correct?" "That's correct," Wilson replied, his confidence still intact. "I'd like to present Defense Exhibit A," Chen stated, nodding to a technician who brought up dashcam footage on the courtroom screens. "This is the unedited footage from your patrol car." The video played in crystal clarity. It showed Zora, following Wilson's instructions, standing with her hands visible on her vehicle at all times. Then came the crucial moment. Wilson approached, and then suddenly staggered backward, clutching his face. But the camera angle clearly showed that Zora had never moved. "Officer Wilson," Chen asked, her tone even, "would you care to explain how the defendant struck you without moving her hands from the vehicle?" Wilson shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "The angle. It doesn't show everything." "Perhaps this angle will be more illuminating," Chen continued, introducing a second video. It was footage from a nearby business's security camera, capturing the scene from a different perspective. Again, it clearly showed Zora remaining motionless while Wilson performed his theatrical stagger. The prosecutor rose to object, but Chen was already moving on, calling her first expert witness, Dr. Elaine Tremblay, a forensic medical examiner. "Dr. Tremblay, you've examined the photographs of Officer Wilson's alleged injuries, both from immediately after the arrest and from today in court. What are your findings?" The doctor used a laser pointer, its crimson dot dancing across the screen. The marking patterns are inconsistent with impact trauma from a strike. There is no swelling progression consistent with blunt force. In fact, the discoloration pattern suggests an artificial enhancement or self-inflicted minor abrasions, not an impact from another person's hand or fist. Wilson's face darkened as the foundation of his story was systematically debunked by medical science. Chen's next piece of evidence was even more damning: a technical analysis of Wilson's body camera. Your Honor, the prosecution provided body camera footage with a suspicious 47-second gap, precisely during the alleged assault. Our technical expert has recovered the deleted footage. The recovered video played. It showed Wilson deliberately turning away from his dash camera's view, reaching up to temporarily disable his body camera, and then re-enabling it just before he began shouting about being assaulted. Officer Wilson, Chen pressed, her voice measured but relentless. Did you tamper with official evidence by deleting this footage? There must have been a technical malfunction, Wilson stammered. A malfunction, Chen echoed, letting the words hang in the air. That precisely coincided with the alleged assault and miraculously resolved itself seconds later. The fabric of Wilson's case continued to unravel as Chen called his partner, Officer Diaz, to the stand. His testimony directly contradicted Wilson's account of the evidence collection, revealing that Wilson had searched Zora's car alone after she was already in custody. And did Officer Wilson follow proper evidence handling protocols? Chen asked. No, ma'am, Diaz testified, his voice low but clear. The pills were never properly logged. The chain of custody was broken multiple times. With each piece of evidence, each testimony, Wilson's case collapsed. The prosecutor, recognizing the disaster unfolding, attempted to salvage what she could through objections, but the truth had gained too much momentum. Chen saved her most powerful revelation for last. Your Honor, the defense would like to introduce Commander Zora Daniels' service record into evidence. Wilson, already reeling, watched in growing horror as Chen presented a document to the court. Commander Daniels is not, as Officer Wilson assumed, some desk-bound administrative officer. She is a decorated Navy SEAL with the Naval Special Warfare Development Group. She is one of only 3 women to have ever completed SEAL training and qualified for Special Operations deployment. A stunned murmur filled the courtroom. Commander Daniels, Chen continued, her voice resonating with authority, has been awarded the Silver Star for Valor in Combat, 3 Purple Hearts, and the Defense Meritorious Service Medal. She has led over 30 successful high-risk operations in theaters of war across the globe. Her hand-to-hand combat training includes mastery of multiple martial arts disciplines taught only to the most elite Special Forces operators. Chen paused, letting the weight of her words sink in. Had Commander Daniels actually struck Officer Wilson as he claims, his injuries would have been severe and unmistakable. The idea that someone with her training would have left superficial marks that could be covered with makeup is frankly absurd. Wilson stared at Zora with new eyes, finally understanding who he had been up against. Not just another defendant to intimidate, but a warrior whose discipline and strategic thinking far exceeded his own. Furthermore, Chen concluded, Commander Daniels was in Millfield on authorized leave following a classified operation. Her reaction to Officer Wilson's unlawful detention showed remarkable restraint, not aggression. Judge Harmon, who had been watching the proceedings with increasing gravity, turned to Wilson. Officer Wilson, in light of this evidence, do you wish to reconsider your testimony? The question was a lifeline, an opportunity for Wilson to salvage some small measure of dignity, but pride and desperation overrode wisdom. I stand by my testimony, Your Honor. It was the final nail in his coffin. For the first time since the hearing began, Zora allowed herself the faintest smile, not of triumph, but of justice finally taking form. As the evidence mounted, Officer Blake Wilson's composure fractured. The cool, controlled demeanor he had cultivated over 15 years on the force crumbled before the eyes of the court. These accusations are absurd, he insisted, his voice rising. This is an orchestrated attack on me, personally. Judge Harmon slowly removed his glasses, his voice carrying the weight of 3 decades on the bench. Having reviewed the evidence, this court finds numerous procedural violations and significant contradictions in Officer Wilson's testimony. The evidence clearly shows that the defendant did not assault Officer Wilson, and that the alleged evidence was, at best, improperly handled, and at worst, deliberately planted. Wilson's knuckles whitened as he gripped the witness stand. The charges against Commander Daniels are hereby dismissed with prejudice, the judge continued. Furthermore, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for investigation into possible criminal misconduct by Officer Wilson. It was the breaking point. 15 years of barely concealed prejudice and unchecked power exploded in a moment of unrestrained fury. "This is because she's military, isn't it?" Wilson shouted, rising from his chair. "If she were just another—" He caught himself, but it was too late. The slur he nearly uttered hung, unspoken but unmistakable, in the air. "Officer Wilson," Judge Harmon warned, his voice like ice, "you will control yourself in my courtroom." But Wilson was beyond control. "You people always stick together. The system's rigged. She's no better than any other." "That's enough," the judge interrupted, motioning to the bailiff. "You are in contempt of this court." Throughout the meltdown, Zora remained seated, her expression reflecting not triumph, but a deep, sorrowful understanding. This man's hatred had corrupted him from the inside out. "Commander Daniels," the judge addressed her, "you are free to go. This court apologizes for the ordeal you have endured." Zora rose with military precision. "Thank you, Your Honor." Just 3 words, delivered with a dignity that stood in stark contrast to Wilson's unraveling. As the bailiff approached Wilson, 2 federal agents stepped forward from the gallery, their badges displayed. "Officer Blake Wilson," the lead agent announced, "you are under arrest for evidence tampering, witness intimidation, perjury, and conspiracy to obstruct justice." The courtroom erupted as Wilson was handcuffed, not by local police but by federal authorities. This was no longer just about one officer. As he was led away, his desperate eyes locked onto Zora's. "You set me up," he spat. Zora met his gaze steadily. "No, Officer Wilson, you set yourself up. I simply ensured that truth had its day in court." Outside, federal officials announced a broader investigation into departmental corruption, with evidence of systematic civil rights violations. Sergeant Miller, they revealed, had agreed to testify against his colleagues in exchange for leniency. 3 days later, in the community center that once faced closure, Zora sat across from Officer Diaz. "What made you step forward?" she asked. "You risked your career." Diaz looked down at his badge. "I became an officer to protect people, not prey on them. I couldn't be a part of it." "That choice," Zora told him, "the harder choice is what real service looks like. Sometimes the greatest courage is facing our own institutions when they fail." Around them, the center buzzed with renewed life, an outpouring of support following the scandal. The department, Diaz explained, was implementing new oversight, body cameras that couldn't be disabled, civilian review boards with actual authority. Small steps, but meaningful ones. 1 week later, Zora stood in her dress uniform at a naval ceremony. Her commanding officer pinned another commendation to her chest, not for battlefield heroism, but for moral courage. Across town, Blake Wilson sat in a rehabilitation program, part of his plea agreement. The man who once wielded his badge as a weapon now had to confront the prejudices that had transformed him from protector to predator. As the sun set over Millfield, Zora stood at her father's grave, placing a small stone on the headstone. "The system that broke you didn't break me," she whispered. "And maybe now, it's a little less broken itself." Her leave would end tomorrow. She would return to a world of classified missions and split-second decisions. But she was leaving behind a hometown slightly more just than she found it. And for a warrior like Commander Zora Daniels, that was the most meaningful victory of all.